So some of you, I recognize familiar faces in the room, certainly, and I know some of you are also new to our community. So I would like to take a chance to introduce our team here at Truth I Lead. So we are the home of engineering leadership. We are embedded within the Faculty of Engineering here at the University of Toronto, and we like to use the centrality to really interrogate the question of how do engineers lead? How can we enable them to lead better? So we are led by a core belief that leadership is for everyone and it is a skill that can be learned. So our goal is to equip engineers with the knowledge and tools to be able to realize their leadership potential. So, of course, we've grown considerably over the years, but our mission continues to be the same, and we steward that through these three pillars here. Um, they're separated for organizational purposes and for understanding, but there is a very virtuous feedback loop of practice and research and teaching, which continues to feed itself and grow and refine itself. So we have a number of innovative student programs, of course, as well as courses. Our pioneering research continues, and today's webinar is an example of that. And we mobilize this knowledge to not only industry partners such as yourselves here, but also peer organizations. Um, Part of the job that I love most here is, of course, connecting with our community of practice partners. So if you were invited to this webinar today, you're very likely from one of these partner organizations, and our work would not be possible without the generous support of our partners who not only engage in our research, and donate philanthropically to our work, but also continue to give us feedback to refine our work here. One of the pieces that I will say that is one of my passions is connecting people with ideas and the skills they need to succeed. So I'm always looking for talent in our community, for researchers, for thought leadership that will help buttress this community of folks who are interested in engineering leadership. And as I continue this work of looking for folks whose research has real world applicable impact as well, I would be remiss if I did not bring Jessica Lee into the picture here. So if you've been connecting with our community for some time, you'll know Jess. You'll recognize Jess. She's a very active member of our community, and she is someone who she's an engineer. She worked for many years in industry, and she really refined this interest in the people side of things and how organizations support leadership development. So she has this deep interest in people development, and currently she's a PhD candidate studying how leadership is understood in engineering services firms and how organizations support this. So this week is Toronto Tech Week, and there's hundreds of events. I'm sure many of you have participated in some of them, or at least heard about them through your colleagues. I've attended a few sessions myself, and I'm reflecting a lot on these conversations around the changing landscape of work. When answers are abundant and the noise signals are high, when you're able to generate information quite quickly with the help of AI, what remains timeless? What remains true, and what matters to people themselves? So Jess takes a very human-centric approach, and she's going to take one of the parts of her learnings from her qualitative research on the culture of care. So it's not an AI talk, but in a changing world, we can take this opportunity to reduce some of that noise and ground ourselves in the human aspect. Um, so Jess will examine how engineers conceptualize leadership and why feeling cared for as a whole person shapes motivation, commitment, and retention. So without further ado, Jess, I'm so delighted to have you with us today. Thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise. I'd love to welcome you to the virtual podium.
Thank you so much, Julie. And hello to everyone. Some of you, I believe we've met at previous events. And to those I haven't met yet, I will first start by introducing myself. As Julie mentioned, I am a chemical engineer by training. I'm a U of T graduate, and I didn't think I would be back when I left U of T the first time. I worked as an engineering consultant. Like many engineering consultants, we wear multiple hats. We're project managers, process engineers. But I was with a small firm, and I thought a lot about how we were training people. I led our recruiting, And I really found my interest shifting to the more organizational, the people side, as Julie mentioned. And that's what took me back to U of T to start this graduate degree in engineering leadership. Alongside this, I'm also in the classroom and I teach at both U of T and York. Um, I would love to get a sense of who is in the room. So if you are able to, I would love for you to drop in your name, your role, or your organization and the city that you're joining us from today. Part of what makes this community so great is that we can learn from each other. Um, and and I welcome your participation today. I just want to give some guidance to how we will participate. I know Zoom is always a little bit awkward. So as Julie mentioned, we are recording and we will make this recording available to all registrants. If we post anything publicly, participant contributions will be removed. So I want you to be comfortable and reassure you that your words will stay within this room. Um, I'm happy for you to engage in a number of ways. Feel free to unmute your mic. If you feel more comfortable, you can use the raise hand function in Zoom, and also feel free to share in the chat. And I love seeing that we are having people from Saskatoon, Montreal coming through to um, our presentation. And Emily, yes, my supervisor is here to make sure I stay on task. So yes, looking forward to hearing from you today. So an outline of today, first I'm going to start with a warm up. I'm a runner. I like to warm up before we get into the meat of things. And then I will have a brief overview of the leadership theories, what I call through the eras. Then I will introduce the most recent qualitative research study that this work is coming out of, and we will discuss one surprising finding from that, which is around care. I'll explore the impact of care, and we will close with a reflection. All right, so for a warm-up, I want you to think about what the word leadership means to you. So if you feel comfortable, share your response in the chat. It could be a phrase, it can be a word, just to get a sense of what, it's something that people have talked about for a really long time, but I think it's still an abstract term. At iLead, I know we think about influence a lot, yes, and leading by example. Excellent. Thinking about empowering others, making a positive contribution, diversity of skills, influence is a word that comes up again. Really great. There are, as you probably know from reading books, even mainstream media, leadership comes up a lot, and there's a lot of different ways to discuss it. And a nod to the Taylor Swift Eras Tour, we're going to just do a little brief overview of why there's been so many ways that we have conceptualized leadership. People have been studying this for over 100 years. First, we had this idea of the great man notions of leadership, where leaders possess certain traits. And into the 40s, people started thinking about it's not these, traits that you were born with, but perhaps leaders are made by the ways that they behave. And then into the 60s and 70s, people started to recognize that leaders needed to tailor these behaviors to situations. It is not just a one-size-fits-all type of action. Then came the idea that leaders are transformational. Here is the idea of the visionary, the charismatic, the motivational leader. And then in the 90s and onwards, we have now moved towards who leaders are in terms of them being authentic, ethical, servant leadership has become very popular. And most recently, people are addressing the complexities of the organizations we're part of, and that leadership can't fall onto one person, but rather taking a systems or shared approach. So it makes sense that there is no one right theory, and I'm not certainly not here to tell you there is one way to describe leadership. And I think our different conceptions of leadership is reflected even through the different focuses of research through the eras of leadership research. Today, though, I want to highlight leadership in engineering consulting. And this, as I mentioned, comes from a larger qualitative study on engineering consulting firms. Why engineering consulting is the first thing I want to discuss. These are organizations that tend to emphasize individuals with both leadership and technical skills. Sometimes we think about people going into management track or a technical track, but these are organizations where you really have to be good at both. And these are organizations that typically will profess that everyone should act like a leader. We also know from research that consulting environments have unique organizational characteristics. And I'm just going to start by touching on some of that because I know we have people that are coming from a consulting organization here today, as well as those from more traditional bureaucratic organizations. So when I mention engineering consulting firms, these are some of the ones you may have heard of in the past. And typically, research is focused on more Fortune 500, manufacturing, traditionally hierarchical bureaucratic organizations. So if we think about the firms on the left, what makes these firms different and why perhaps might we want to look at leadership in these firms? Number one, these are firms that are applying specialist knowledge, meaning that you're not only applying technical knowledge, but you're applying knowledge that is relevant to that specific client, that specific industry, and you are making solutions that are custom. It is not, you create a product that you then reproduce and sell over time. These organizations tend to also be very flat, meaning they have fewer formal hierarchies. Individuals are afforded high autonomy and there's low managerial control, like a manager telling you exactly what to do or what is good job. And then also there's an identity that starts to form with people in these organizations. These are even from a very early on in your career, you're starting to see as a professional, you're being recognized that way by your clients, your peers. So all of that so these are not just unique to engineering consulting. This is true of other types of professional services firms like management consulting, accounting, law. But I think it's also true of organizations that may have service-oriented departments or task forces within them. We were having conversations at a conference with someone, and they were talking about how in banking, they could see some of their teams fitting within these characteristics. Now, I mentioned that this is a study on engineering consulting and leadership within these characteristics, but also that this is a qualitative research project. Now, I imagine this audience is probably familiar with research, maybe running experiments or conducting surveys, and perhaps qualitative research is a bit more unfamiliar. So I just want to briefly introduce why we might use qualitative research. Oftentimes, it's a focus on understanding why, how people understand something, what meaning they attach to something, what is the context that's happening in this environment. So if we reduce it down into the most simplistic terms, in quantitative studies, we're oftentimes looking at numbers, and that is our data. But in qualitative research, we're using words as our data. And in this case, the data is coming from interviews with engineering consultants across 3 North American engineering consulting firms. So now I'm going to highlight one of the findings that came out of this. One of our studies examined conceptions of leadership, so how engineers understood leadership. And we talked to people at various career stages holding various roles. And the thing that came up that was not necessarily salient in all of the leadership research, prior when we were looking at, the different focuses that leadership research has gone through, It's this idea of care. And this appeared across all three organizations, across all levels, where people talked about effective leaders as caring for the whole person. So, what does that mean? Care, like leadership, is such an abstract term, right? So, I want to share a quote from one of the participants that I thought highlighted what care may look like. This individual said, when I was doing my internship, I was also studying part-time at the university and I was preparing for a student exchange at the same time. So I was quite busy. My manager made sure to catch up with me, made sure I wasn't overwhelmed with work or I wasn't like too stressed. And he didn't just do it one time just to say like checklist done or something. He would actually genuinely come and ask if everything's fine. The main reason why I wanted to go back to this firm after my internship was because he really cares for the people he works with. So this was an individual who was early on in his career talking about why he chose to come back. And he mentioned that this manager that he had was quite technically competent, but the care was the one aspect that really shone through for him. And before I discuss more around how care showed up in the research, I feel like this is a concept that is not unique to just the engineering consultants I spoke with. So I want us to reflect, taking a moment about a time that you felt cared for at work. Um, and as you think through that, I wonder what impact did it have? How did you feel? That those sort of stories were echoed in the findings that came out of this research. So I want to share some examples to give some tangible, concrete ways that care was discussed or demonstrated or felt. So let's explore that. Um, Caring leaders initiated check-ins. This came up over and over again. And these check-ins weren't always formal. So one participant said, some leaders checked in with you, your personal life, your personal development, your career, your wellness, or your happiness with the company. Some people actually checked in with you and some people forgot. Maybe they're too busy, but I think those tasks is quite critical if you're managing people. It could be very simple. They could be talking with you for a project, and then they came for a few minutes, ask about how your workload is and how's your life. What do you think about this project? Or what do you think about this new policy? You can have the time to express your opinion about the company, about other people, about their projects, something like that. Get your opinion so you feel you get heard. So there's this idea of what's happening in the workplace, but also what's happening in your life that's coming through. And care was felt through these check-ins. Here was a junior engineer who had just started on a job site and was coming across a very caustic personality. And really had trouble with this person. So eventually their manager realized what was happening, and she shared the manager genuinely checked in on me often. He messaged like Teams message. He came out to site. He sent another senior manager also out to site and started sending other managers out to site just to talk to us, like give us other people as points of contact. These are not necessarily complicated or grand gestures, but what came through in these interviews were these small moments that made someone feel more supported at work. And on that note, there's really value to small talk. Checking in doesn't have to be a formal thing. One person said, obviously, all the small talk is fairly important. Without the small talk, you wouldn't be able to know if something's going on in the life of someone. For example, tomorrow I'm going to get a coffee with my manager because it's my last day before going on vacation. It's just like small acts here and there, catching up in small conversation. Another person said, so checking in, pretty often, but doing it in a way it doesn't feel like they're micromanaging you. It's not like, hey, have you done this yet? It's more like, hey, are you needing any help? So I'm checking in not just about the work, but about how someone is doing. And in hearing this, I wonder what this means for organizations that are remote, where these small, informal conversations may not be happening as organically as they once were when we're all in the same room, and why there may be a case to bring people together. Um, Care was also demonstrated through just listening, because sometimes a leader doesn't have the answers. Here is a functional manager who said, if there's corporate issues that they can't solve themselves, I'm the person they come to for help. And sometimes I can help, and sometimes I can't. But at a minimum, I can at least have a sympathetic ear to try to explain why things are the way they are. I myself want to feel heard, even if you can't fix everything, you know? So there's the relational aspect of these actions coming through. But listening isn't enough if there isn't follow through. People notice when there's follow through. This one individual say, actually pay attention to whatever the person is saying and then act upon it. Say you wanted to do something, then not just be like, oh yeah, sounds good, and then you move on. You actually remember it 2 months later. This happened to me last year. I mentioned something to someone, then like 2 months later, they were like, remember we had that conversation? Well, I just found this training that's being offered in 1 week. Do you want to join that training? It feels good to have that type of attention because you feel like they care about you. It's not only you that's trying to make yourself better and fighting to try to advance your career and so on. It's also like you feel like you're supported in that. And then finally, I want to emphasize that what these individuals, when they felt care, they felt like they were more important than the work. One person said two leaders that I've had that have been super influential, they had this way of being a leader where I feel like they care more, slightly more about me personally than they do about the actual work getting done. And of course, we're a company, we're here to make money, and the work's important. But a big part of leadership is if the people that you're being a leader to aren't happy, they're not going to perform at their greatest. It's our understanding that, hey, as long as you're taking care of people first, their work will get done. Another example of this was an individual who talked about um, not loving where they were living and wanting to move. They said, if I were back in another city and communicated, okay, I'm not like super happy here, I'm going to move. There's definitely some managers where I wouldn't tell that to because they very much had the organization more in their center of focus versus my own personal well-being, which is fair. Like they hired me to do a job, so I get their perspective 100%. But also, I'm not going to go to them with like my personal problems because their thoughts will be more on like, how's this going to affect the firm? How are you going to keep completing your work? How are you going to keep doing this versus how are you doing as a person? How can we help you as a person? So I gave you a lot of quotes, and because I want to emphasize the stories, and I think it provides a more salient example of what care may look like. And a bit of a summary of what we've heard so far is from the research, care looked like leaders who checked in with their team, leaders who were attuned to the needs of their people, whether they were formally a subordinate or a follower or just people that they were in touch with. And leaders were responsive and followed through by taking action. They prioritized these people above the work, and that care was genuine. Um, an individual had noted that, you need to be genuine about it. You can't just have it be on a list, and then just check mark that. So now that we've discussed this a bit more of what care could potentially look like, and maybe you have examples of where you felt cared for or perhaps even demonstrated care to your team, I want us to reflect on why does care matter at work? What is the impact of that care? And I think it would be valuable for us to discuss and share in perhaps smaller groups. So I'm going to ask Julie to put us into breakout rooms um, where you can maybe discuss some of the examples you've seen, what resonated, what perhaps hasn't occurred to you in the workplace, and to discuss why does this matter? Or does it matter? Is it an extra thing that we have to do? Daniel said, on the topic of genuine care, I remember a colleague complaining about our boss not being genuine and getting the ick from it. And that's what's so hard about these relational things, right? We are, as engineers, really good at teaching processes, teaching someone how to build a project or how to do technical work, but how do you teach how to show care? Is it something that's innate? Um, Julie, let me know when
Perfect. Perfect. So I'm getting ready to open up the breakout rooms, but I just wanted to let everyone know if you have any technical problems, Jess and I will be here in the main room. So please feel free to come back and ask us questions if you need any support. But aside from that, enjoy your conversation.
we'll invite you back in about 5 to 10 minutes. I love that you talked about the impact of care actually being a productive thing for the organization. Oftentimes we think as engineers, we can be linear thinkers and we think, if I focus on the thing that I care about, if it's the work, if I speak to people about the work, then that is the only way for work to be done. And we see reflected in the findings and maybe in your conversations that that isn't always the case. And I think that's a really great way to actually segue to what we found in the findings about the impact of care. Demonstrating care, number one, is one way to be recognized as a leader, whether you are in a positional leadership role or you hold some, formal role. This is something that people do appreciate. And these examples of leaders that demonstrated care would stay with someone. Some of these stories are describing a leader from a decade ago that they had. As we've already touched on in our discussions, it has a motivational impact on the team. I saw, especially, in engineering consulting, when you're working on job sites and you're doing long hours, whether it's in construction or in commissioning, there's a willingness by the team to put in those extra hours when they feel that their leaders cared about who they were and their well-being. There's a higher quality in the output of work. And we saw it in our beginning example about retention. We all know that turnover is costly for organizations. But people who had managers, people who felt that the organization cared about them were more likely to return or to stay at the organization that they're with. Um, Emily, I'm seeing your comment about discussions about providing care for the care providers. Yeah, caring for people on job sites. So, what do we do about this? What is something that we can take away from this discussion? I think awareness is the first step. Oftentimes, formal leadership roles will call for very explicitly technical management or financial accountabilities. We all are aware of that. But these relational activities, such as care, are often not explicit and therefore often not rewarded in these more formal ways. But from our data, we can see that engineers desire this. Some perhaps even expect that their leaders will demonstrate a level of care. Um, and they appreciate and they recognize, and these leaders hold influence when they do allow their team to feel cared for. The other thing that I want to leave you with is that small informal actions, such as checking in or expressing interest about someone's, whether it's their career goal or about something about their lives can actually can go a long way, can have important outcomes. So when I was going through this data, I would often think about the times when I used to be, like many of you would know, like you're doing a lot. You have all these emails that are unanswered. You have to get back to your client. And you might not take that time to stop in the hallway or to hold and to add in some extra small talk at the end of a conversation or at the beginning of a meeting. And in this efficiency focused society that we're in, we sometimes don't see the value or the explicit outcomes that come from just having a normal one-on-one conversation that's not about the work. So that's something that I think we can all very easily do as a way of demonstrating care. And but while we're discussing care, I think it is also important to ask, who are we expecting care from? Do we expect care from our people managers, from certain people managers, from everyone in the organization? Do we expect care from our senior leaders? And then who is expected to deliver that care? Is that equitable across the organization? And to kind of challenge our own assumptions around this. And I recognize that we are almost at the end of the time. I appreciate all of you for engaging with me in this hour, and I know we're all really busy. I want us to just take a minute as a final closing reflection to think about one way that's within our capacity, that's authentic to you, that is feasible within your role, within the constraints in your professional and your personal life, what you can do to exemplify care at work. So I'll just give you a minute to maybe jot that down. If you would like to share with the group, you're always welcome to do so.
I just wanted to share also just what you've left me with so many questions, and you mentioned equity, so it got me thinking, who are the recipients of care? Is it evenly distributed, and how can we uh, how can we be more mindful about that? Is it being in person versus virtual a component of that, right? So there's so many more threads that we can pull on here, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity for this space and the discussion. I would love to hear from others in terms of what are you thinking about from this, and how do you practice this as well? Does anybody want to unmute and add to the conversation?
Yeah, sure. I can say something. It's Pramora Rabello from Chemtrade. So I feel like for every leader, as a leader, it's multiplied. So if you start to show care and you've got leaders on your team, they are going to emulate your behavior. So you have an even bigger kind of megaphone, so to speak, to take that care to much deeper in the organization. And certainly, you asked what are we going to do to exemplify? I think I'm personally going to take that to the organization, and there are many means to do it. I've always known care is important, but listening to this, I think you've done the research to actually prove that it's important. So it's so very important. And I love the examples at the beginning where people were sharing more personal examples. Someone had a death, someone was going through a divorce. We cannot be. I always say to my team and to people when I meet them, that you bring your whole self to work. You do not park your personal life at the door. If you have a sick child at home, you cannot forget about that when you're working. So the more that we as leaders can care about our employees, know what is going on with them, and help them even by giving them a listening ear. And if I can say one more thing, and then I'll be quiet because I know time is running out. When we listen, we must engage in a way that is what we call level 3 listening, which is you're not listening because you want to share your own story, but you want to listen because you want to see what is not being said, and you want to really try to help that person to empathize with what is going on. So if someone says, "Oh, I'm overwhelmed, I've got so much to do," your response as a leader shouldn't be, "We all have a lot to do. I have a lot to do as well." Your response is, "Oh, that must feel really difficult for you." So Make sure you take a little bit of time to care for yourself, and then how can you help them to do that? So I just want to share those little tidbits, but this has been a very good session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bramora. I think that was a really lovely summary of our entire session, and about what we can do in within our capacity to demonstrate that care for both ourselves and for other people. I actually think that was a great way for us to end off. I hope you took away something that you can, easily put into place in your workplace, or maybe just to think about this in a different way. As Bramor mentioned, this is not new. This is not this is probably something you've thought of before, but perhaps we can be a bit more explicit about it. I do want to take a moment before I let you go to acknowledge that the participants and the participating organizations of the study, we couldn't do this without them. And then also some members of the Truce ILE team. I couldn't find a picture of all of us, but certainly a team that I feel cared for. And then lastly, if you have any questions or comments, or if you want to have further discussions, I'm always happy to connect. You can reach me on LinkedIn, or if you want to send me an email. But otherwise, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to engage with you today. It's always really lovely to talk to the practitioners that this research is impacting. All right. I
Jess,
will.
thank you so much for your leadership. We're so grateful that you were able to spotlight this important topic around the culture of care. I know we know it in our gut, but we can't always have the data and the language to explain it. So I'm also very grateful to the leadership of everyone in this group who were able to share and give us new language, new ways of thinking. Our hope is always that you don't only learn from our speaker and our experts, but you're experts as well. And we learn from you and you learn from each other. So that's the amplification piece as well from Aura, so the knowledge is also amplified, not only the care. So with that, I just want to say thank you again to the entire group. I'll put a link in the chat for you to be able to give us feedback. We always want to hear from you. And as Jess said, please reach out to us with any questions you may have, or if you want to continue the conversation. Have a great weekend, everyone. Enjoy.